I want to begin this video by asking a question. Have you ever given up on a certain video game only to come back to it years later and end up loving it? As for me, I've done it more times than I can remember, but it happened most recently with a game called Dead Cells. Dead Cells is a 2D roguelike game by MotionTwin. The game has overwhelmingly positive reviews everywhere you look, despite it not being as popular or influential as some other indie games. I bought the game over a year ago and liked it enough, making minimal content surrounding the game but still enjoying it off camera, but I never truly got into the game. Until now. Today I want to talk about why I never got into the game originally and also what I think about it now. Spoiler alert, I think this game is awesome. Subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this, and let's get started. Let's begin by telling the story of how and why I gave up on Dead Cells about a year ago. I always thought the game was pretty fun. The art style's great, the music is cool, the game just recently had a crossover with one of my favorite video game franchises. There were a lot of reasons for me to enjoy the game. That being said, I soon discovered that the roguelike genre was not for me. I just disliked roguelike mechanics as a whole. It wasn't that I thought the game was bad, I just found roguelike elements to be too grindy and repetitive, and I still somewhat agree with that. I actually went into the game thinking it was a Metroidvania because that's what it says on Steam. It was my first ever time playing a roguelike game, which I should explain what type of roguelike mechanics that Dead Cells has. You start from the beginning of the game, then you move on to different areas as you collect new abilities and work your way up, and you either make it to the end of the game or you die trying. After you die, the idea is that you lose the majority of the things you found in your previous run. Now obviously roguelike games aren't all exactly the same, but that's the best way I can explain it based on the 3 or so roguelike games that I've played so far. The concept of roguelike gameplay is inherently repetitive because you're replaying the same stages, and that's the biggest reason I just don't care for roguelikes. I just feel like I'm wasting my time doing something I've already done 100 times. Even if it's still fun the 100th time, what am I getting out of doing it? Sure, video games are technically a waste of time already, but in my opinion, it's even more of a waste if it's not a new experience. And so that's the main reason I stopped playing Dead Cells. Even though I liked some things about it, I couldn't justify grinding the game. I just moved on to other games that gave me more of a reason to play. I also think one of the reasons I gave up on the game was the fact that I was playing on a mouse and keyboard, which if you know anything about this game, the developers advise you to use a controller. I just never thought about it, and since I was already used to mouse and keyboard, I never made the switch. And that resulted in me being pretty bad at the game. I never even made it to a single final boss in my 15 hours of playing the game on Steam. It's pretty hilarious looking back at it. Overall, it's definitely a bummer that I almost gave up on the game for good, but at the end of the day, I finally got into the game over a year later, and that's the important thing. So let's focus on that, shall we? I've already established that the roguelike genre is not one that I particularly enjoy. However, just because I don't like the genre doesn't necessarily mean I can't enjoy a few games from it. I've now played 3 games from this genre that I actually do like, starting with Dave the Diver, an indie roguelike game that I think is a pretty incredible game for when you just want to relax for a few hours. It's not a difficult game and the roguelike mechanics are never tedious. It's just a really solid comfort game, which isn't something you typically see in this genre. Next, we have God of War Ragnarok's Valhalla DLC. Yes, I know this technically isn't a full game itself, and yes, I know the main game is not a roguelike, but believe it or not, this DLC is actually a roguelike, and I think it's pretty awesome. And finally, the latest roguelike that I've really enjoyed is, of course, Dead Cells. So let's go over the reasons why I have learned to actually love the game despite my distaste for roguelikes most of the time. First of all, the biggest reason why I finally got into Dead Cells is because I bought the PS5 edition. Say what you want about the PS5, yes, I agree, it's probably the worst generation of PlayStation so far, but I personally get a lot of use out of mine. One of the reasons being that it meets a great balance between good hardware and the ability to buy physical games and actually own the product that I purchase, which is a very long-winded and unnecessary way of saying I prefer consoles to PC mostly because of physical games. I also prefer using controllers, which is a nice segue into the next reason. I finally got used to playing the game the way it was designed. Back when I first started the game, I didn't really think about plugging in a USB controller, but now that I have it on console, I had no choice other than to get good. And get good I did. I cruised through the game, defeating the Hand of the King, the Queen, and even Dracula. It was awesome. I truly enjoyed my experience playing through Dead Cells. Even though I've said countless times that I don't even like the roguelike genre, this game was simply good enough to make me love it anyway. It's kinda a remarkable achievement if you think about it. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Dead Cells might have my favorite combat in gaming. It's just so incredibly addicting. And the best part about it is that it's almost entirely skill-based. If you fail a parry, it's your fault. If you neglect using critical hits, it's on you. For a game that's very difficult, it's also extremely fair. I will say some of the gameplay does require luck to succeed. For example, in every single run I've had that resulted in defeating the final boss, I used a weapon called the Flint, which is incredibly broken, especially if you get a legendary version, but I'm willing to overlook this because the gameplay is just way too good. I also just love the Return to Castlevania DLC. After recently playing the two best games in the franchise, this DLC is an absolute love letter to fans. I love everything about this DLC, specifically the music. Dead Cells has a pretty good soundtrack as a whole, but it's the music in this DLC that blows my mind. So many great remixes of iconic Castlevania tracks. If you're 700 years old and you played this franchise as a kid, it's sure to give you a ton of nostalgia. Overall, Dead Cells has given me a great video game experience, and now I can safely move on to the next game in the backlog. Or at least that's what I thought. The truth is, I played through normal mode and got one boss cell. Boss cells are used to upgrade the difficulty mode, which means I beat the first difficulty of the game and that's it. But hey, that's no big deal. If anything, it just gives me more of an excuse to keep playing Dead Cells, a game that I enjoy. But why is it that I kinda don't feel like continuing? And that's the problem I'm facing now. Should I keep playing Dead Cells now that I've unlocked new difficulties? Or is it just not worth the grind? Even though I've demonstrated that I really like this game, I actually don't think I'll keep playing it at this point in time, and here's why. It's simple. I don't really care for added difficulty modes in most games. I always choose the default difficulty setting, and unless I'm already very skilled at the game and it won't require hours upon hours of learning new strategies, I likely won't be interested in any other modes. I would just rather spend my time trying something new. I understand that the added difficulties in the game add a ton of new content, new weapons, new abilities, new areas, and new bosses, but I just don't want to suffer through what I view as a grind. It would eventually just take up too much of my free time, and just be frustrating in general, and I just don't think the added content will make up for those two things. I think it all comes back to what I talked about earlier. The roguelike genre just isn't for me. It doesn't mean I can't enjoy certain roguelikes, because I certainly enjoyed my time with this game, but when it comes to really difficult gameplay that involves losing progress consistently, I find it more frustrating than worth it. Dead Cells is a pretty difficult game already, so I don't feel the need to make it even more challenging. I had fun with the challenge I was already provided. I'm not looking for anything else out of this game. I beat the 3 final bosses that I wanted to beat, I saw the credits roll, and for that reason, I think I'm done with the game. But who knows, maybe I will eventually grow to like the more difficult modes. I know a lot of people recommended me to keep playing the game, but listen, I still have hundreds of games I haven't touched yet. I think I'll move on to something more fresh. This video went from negative to positive, and then back to somewhat negative, but I'll always have positive things to say about Dead Cells going forward. Dead Cells gave me everything I wanted out of it. The mechanics are smooth, the combat itself is masterful, and the DLCs are the icing on the cake, and I honestly don't think I'd like this game nearly as much without them. In a world where most modern games cost 60 to 70 bucks, Dead Cells is worth the low price whether you get 10 hours of entertainment or 100. Let me know what you think about Dead Cells down in the comments. Definitely a very interesting game, and one I'm grateful to have experienced.